Hey, ooh, and I'm choking. Wow. Hey, gang.
You all right?
Oh, my God. Well, hold on. Beverage break. Just right. That's how we start the show. Always so professional here at Try Not to Curse. Hey, gang. Welcome to another episode of Try Not to Curse. It's Elizabeth Marvel here with you. I am with an actual real live guest. This is very exciting. As you guys know, scheduling is always a problem. And with this guest, it's been no exception. Gabe, my friend. Dude, we've known each other since the second grade.
Yep. Yes, we have.
We did campfire scouts together, if anyone knows what that is.
Oh, boy. Wow. That's a... Oh.
Right?
That was a reminder for me, man. I had completely blanked that from my memory. Okay,
yeah, man.
Yeah.
So you went on where did you go to college?
I was fortunate enough to get into Wesleyan off the wait list.
Nice.
So, I born in Connecticut, college in Connecticut. Now I live in Connecticut again. So
hey, same
I've been
here.
in Connecticut my whole life.
Same here. I understand. Yeah. But you got an environmental engineer or environmental science?
It's Earth and Environmental Sciences.
Okay.
When I first, obviously as a freshman, you have no concept of what you're going to do for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
But I was at the time still in like high school. Like I loved AP history, and especially Miss Val. I mean, Miss Val was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my freshman year, my freshman advisor was a history and government professor. And, we sat down. It was like week one. He's like, well, you have to your sophomore year to decide, but do you have any beginnings of what you want to do? And I was like, oh, it's funny you ask, because I want to do history, government, what you teach. And he goes, no, don't do it. He goes, absolutely not. If I could go back and change, I would. But he goes, you go down this path, you are limiting yourself to what you can do, and he kind of outlined it. They were all basically teaching related, right?
Yeah,
or being an author. And so, that was the first time that I really put some serious thought into what I wanted to do. 'Cause I think I was just riding the high, AP history.
Right.
So then I did comp sci. That was my declared major. And first semester was kicking butt. It was great. Computers, programming. We did some Python, getting into C++. And then
I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds very impressive.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It sounds very impressive.
They're programming languages.
Yeah.
Like Python is like the baby programming language.
Okay.
You can learn it. You can teach it to yourself. It's intro.
Okay.
And then I got to C++, and that is a different language. It's more advanced, and I'm sure any savvy coder listening to you is going to look at me, look at the audio and be like, what is he talking about? C++ is not that hard. But to me it was, and it was specifically the way the professor relayed the information. So how sometimes your brain doesn't mesh with whomever is the instructor.
Sure,
because the way they present it and the way you process don't click.
Yeah. That's pretty much my entire middle school, high school, elementary school career. Yeah, genuinely.
Come on.
Genuinely, dude.
So I was doing well, but then I was in danger of failing this class, and that wasn't a good sign. Your second semester in a declared major. It was a 100 level class.
Okay.
So and to his credit, the professor met with me for lunch. He sat down. He goes, and he knew that I had declared comp sci because that's the department he's in, and he basically said, look, the deadline for locking it in is in 2 weeks. He goes, you probably are not going to pass my class. I think you should look elsewhere for a major before we get to that deadline. And I appreciate, I was personally hurt.
Of course,
it's hard to hear that because it's like you're trying but failing, right?
Yeah.
So I took his advice. at that point in my life, I did not do that often because I was always right. I still mostly am.
I mean, not everybody's perfect,
Yeah. So I dropped a major, and then I'm like, okay, what now? I have 2 weeks. I dropped the class, so I had an open slot, and I was like, what am I going to do? I didn't really I thought it was history government. They told the professor right away said, don't go down that path. Then I was really into computers, even back then. And so I Wesleyan is a liberal arts, love it. I'm so glad I went. It exposed me to such diversity. I know that's a taboo word.
Well, now, yeah.
But, so just to back it up, going from high school to college, while I wasn't a conservative, I was more conservative. And so going to some place like Wesleyan, where it's just such a diverse community and there's, cultures, it opened my eyes. So anyway.
That's great.
I ramble and I'm going to digress a lot when we talk.
That's what we're here for. That's my listeners expect nothing less on this show.
All right. I'm very verbose. So I'll start going down one path and I'll be like, oh, squirrel.
That's great. We love that.
So back to comp sci, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. This is like a big deal, right? I mean, in retrospect, considering the path I've taken, I guess I shouldn't have been as stressed as I was at the time. But, I am like a sophomore. I've got 2 weeks. I don't know what I'm going to pick. And so I just happened. To be honest, it was probably based on schedule.
Okay, sure.
The time the class occurred.
Yeah.
I picked a class, and it was Intro to Planetary Geology.
Whoa. That sounds fun, though. That sounds like really interesting.
Yeah, no. It was what are they called? An elective, like anyone from any major could take it. Low level, right? 100. It was like 101 or something like that. So it was taught by Professor Martha Gilmore, and I just remember going into the first class, and look, it's college. Sometimes you party too much. You're tired. You're in the back. Not that I ever slept. We can talk about that with Tobias in a minute. Not that I ever slept during class, but you zone out.
Yeah.
Well, from day one, I was locked in and like completely fascinated, not only with what was being presented, but the enthusiasm.
Oh, that's the best. Yeah.
With how she presented it.
Yeah.
I could tell from the way she was describing the lithology of Mars and the orbits. Like, this wasn't a job. This was a passion. Come to find out, she was, and again, I don't want to make broad statements that I have not personally verified, but
sure.
Anecdotally, I've been told she was on the committee that advised where Spirit and Opportunity would land.
Wow.
So when you have a landing ellipse, right? Because you can't say it's going to land on this spot. A lot of factors play into that. So
of course,
when for missions, any lander, you get an ellipse, right? So you have to figure out where that ellipse is going to fit. What's the safest? And so there's an advisory, or at least there was an advisory committee, and she was on it. So like right away, I mean, you have enthusiasm and then the creds to back it up.
Right, exactly.
Right? So
yeah.
I was class number 1, sold. I think at the end of the week, because I gave it like 3 days, or I had a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and at Friday, because it was a 9:30 class, and I was always there. So I'm not a morning person.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
So that Friday, I went in to the head of the E&ES department, Earth and Environmental Science, and I said, this is it. I want to do this.
That's awesome.
I am locked in. And so it was honestly by chance, because if you remember back in high school, freshman year, oh my God.
Yeah.
The high school that no longer exists.
Yeah. Earth
really.
Sciences. Yep.
But I didn't take that.
Oh, really?
I took BSCS. So I never even took environmental science in high school.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have any concept of that field. I knew I always enjoyed science, like things clicked, chemical formulas, it's just how my brain works.
Sure.
The little hamster up there likes that. So I kind of just lucked into it. I mean, it was a function of selecting a class to fill the spot of the class that I had to drop. And there were only certain classes. I remember scrolling through on my old laptop, the Dave Matthews sticker on it. My son still plays with it. There's no battery in it, but he goes around, he pretends he's a cybersecurity engineer. So I remember looking through, being panicked, okay, I need to find something to fill. I need to find something to fill that I'm going to do well in. And hopefully those are something I enjoy. So I was looking through the list, and it just happened, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I was searching all the classes in every major. And I was like, oh, planetary geology, that I like planets, but that sounds cool. And it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30. So that works. And that was it. The rest is, as they say, history. And now if I know we're on audio, but I have the solar system on my arm.
I love it.
So, so that's how I got into environmental science. I will caveat this with Wesleyan is great. Love it. However, and the professors I had in the environmental science department, awesome.
Yeah.
They did not teach the major for work. They taught the major assuming you were going to grad school. Okay. So there was no, for instance, UConn has, I think it's environmental engineering or something like that. Gary Robinson, he's, I believe it's Gary Robinson. Anyway, he runs that program, and they do classes like I took, geochemical analysis, right? So they get into the science, right? But they also have classes in the major where you go out and you drill a monitoring well.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, okay.
To sample the groundwater.
Some real hands-on.
Or you go
practical.
Take a sample. And if you graduate and go into the workforce with that major, you have, I don't want to say limited options in jobs. You have limited options in, types of jobs.
Sure.
So it prepared you for more schooling. And at the time, that was not on the table.
Yeah.
I both financially and mentally, I was fried. It was like, for the first time in my life, there's no school. Now, with that comes other responsibilities, of course, but I was just not ready for grad school. So I was prepared for grad school and not going, but going into the workforce and not prepared for it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with me as well. And same thing. I went to the University of Hartford, and you know, what kind of sold me was when we had talked to them, somebody in the administration office had said, we're going to help you get a job when you graduate and blah, 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 blah. But it was the same thing. They were really just encouraging you more to, if you go into the master's program and get a master's in this, then you get more experience in the field and more opportunities. And instead, it was, same thing. It was no, just do all of your AUCs, and you still have to take a math course. So it wasn't a focus on your major. It was just a typical university where you have to go and fill your days with all these other courses that have nothing to do with what you ultimately want to do. And the same thing. My parents were like, "Listen, we're glad you're loving it. We're glad you're taking all the courses. You're trying all the things, but we certainly can't afford to let you go there any more than 4 years, or you're on your own." And so it's I completely I hear you. And unfortunately, I think that's a lot of people's stories, because how many times do you go somewhere and you're like, well, what was your major and why aren't you doing it? And why, and for me, it was the same thing. I have a bachelor's in fine art, and everybody assumed I was going to be a teacher. Nope. I have no desire to teach at all. I wanted to work in museums. That's what I wanted to do. And we did have a museum studies program. However, it had to have a certain number. It had to have a certain number of students enrolled in order for you to go. And it was only offered every other year. So by the time I had enough credits and was able to take the course, nobody else was in the course. So they're like, well, we're just not going to do it this year. I'm like, cool, because I graduate next year and you don't offer it. So what does that mean?
Oh my God.
And every museum within, the closest museum to where I was living at the time, where I'm living now, is 45-minute hour commute. So
Peabody?
No, like they're like the Aldrich in Ridgefield. It's like, like 45 minutes depending on traffic, whatever.
Okay.
But again, it's a small little contemporary art museum. It's not like they're just looking for people to fill some spots they don't have, So that's why I'm where I am now. And again, so for you, when you did graduate, what did you end up doing initially for work?
Yep. So, you graduate, you have the environmental science degree, and you start looking at, want ads for new graduates, right? And so I graduated in May of 2006. Yep. And so obviously the job search started before graduation.
Yeah.
Did not really get a lot of callbacks. Now, my dad knew someone who worked for, at the time, it was Northeast Generation, I believe, because it was Eversource Northeast Generation, whatever the electric power company was. And so I applied for a summer position, and they called it as a park ranger. Do you remember up on Candlewood, what is it? I think it's called like Dykes Point. Up in Candlewood.
Okay.
It used to be, it was owned by the power company, and it was, do you know the marina?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right next to the marina, there's that parking lot there. That was the park. And there was a trail that went out, and there's a little island off the end of the trail. Right. Yep. So all well and good. Monday through Friday, it was cake. I mean, there was no one coming in.
Yeah.
It was the Saturdays and Sundays, because at one point the park had been advertised in some publication that got spread around in like New York City. Oh. And it was advertised as a free park on the water. And so Saturdays and Sundays, my God, it wasn't park ranger. Well, first of all, Northeast paid for 2 officers to stay there on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yep, sure.
Because that's how crazy it was.
Yeah.
And, they would basically, they're not doing anything except stopping bad stuff, right?
Right.
They're just going to sit in their car with the AC on. They were great, though. They were great. It was the same 2 guys. And I'm walking around picking up diapers, and I'm thinking to myself,
gosh,
I just went, because they would leave diapers on the spots, right?
Of course.
And so my job was, and it's fine. My job's my job. I was a janitor, basically, right? I'm walking around picking up beer cans, which they weren't supposed to have, diapers, which were full, right? And, there were garbage cans, but not on Saturdays and Sundays. So I would just go around with a bucket and a little cloth thing and pick up the trash, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to swear, Jesus effing Christ.
Yeah.
You just went to what at the time, and I believe it still is, one of the top environmental science programs for undergraduates in the country.
Right.
It was like 8, right? Based on like graduation, job success. I don't know, some metric.
Retention. Yeah.
Point is, it was one of the good ones, right? And I'm like, I'm walking around picking up diapers. Now, I don't mean to say that that's not a honorable job.
Sure, someone's got to do it. Yeah, somebody's got to do it.
I am just equating both the amount of money my mother and I owe, and I'm walking like, what did I pay for?
Yeah.
Not that the job is not worth doing, because it needs to be done, but what was all that money for?
Right.
Right. Like, if this is my option, because I still didn't really know. And so summer transition to fall, and they kept me on. They kept me on like the maintenance. So I would go around to like Winstead at the hydro dam up there, and I would do the mowing and the weeding and just general like, the fence fell down. Repair.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And they kept me on in the fall, and then I finally started getting calls. I had applied to so many companies, right? And zero response. If we're up on time, I that's one thing I didn't ask you. Like,
Oh, no.
Because I don't want to keep rambling.
No, you're fine. You're totally fine.
All right. So I finally started getting calls in September, and the company was Kleinfelder. It was it's a California-based. It started out as geotechnical, but then they got bigger and bigger, and then they switched to environmental work. And basically, it was a large engineering firm that started in California and now had a national presence.
Okay.
So the office was up in South Windsor. That's what it was. So I go in for the interview, and I'm nervous. It's like suit and tie that doesn't fit, right? All that. And it was good. The people that I interviewed with were, it was easygoing. They were young. The office had a lot of young faces in it. Didn't know what I was going to be getting in for.
Sure.
Right. But it was a job, and so that first job, I was hired at $36,000.
Wow. Yep.
36,000.
Yep. Retail.
Times were also different than cost of
living.
Oh yeah,
no, yeah. Back then it wasn't too terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. For a brand new green college graduate, which they knew I was not prepared for environmental fieldwork.
Sure.
So then I get trained, and I did it for almost 15 years, and basically a large part of it is planning. And right as you move up, you're less and less in the field. Like you go to a gas station, you see a drill, and there's a guy with a clipboard next to it. That's the environmental scientist.
Yeah.
They're logging soil. They're going to check water. They're going to measure air, all that stuff.
Yeah, make sure nothing gets contaminated. It's all being done properly according to standard.
If you have a gas station, you have contamination. That 100%. There's no doubt in that.
Yeah.
So our office, our big thing was podcast. A very, very one of the largest petroleum companies on Earth. They are, you're reciting them in your head and you've already said it. Mm-hmm. So we had 76 job sites just in the Connecticut and Southern Mass area. And literally, this is what I did until the market crashed the first time. For 3 years, just under, you would, as the entry level, you would get your instructions. You would go out, spray paint CBYD on the pavement.
I've seen that. Okay.
Come back to the office. Then they do that. That's a call before you dig. You mark out the subsurface utilities.
Sure.
Then you go out with the drilling company, and they bring a drill rig or sometimes an excavator, and your job is to drill down, collect soil samples on the way down, record them in a very specific fashion, right? And then possibly submit soil samples to the lab. And then eventually you will come back to that well after like a week or two, because the water has to settle and, it's got to get equalized with the groundwater.
Yep, sure.
And then you will sample that well and submit those and rinse and repeat every day. That's it. The only thing that changed was the start time, because for Greenwich, we had to leave our office at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh.
Traffic and how busy the area was in Greenwich.
Sure.
It's just compact. You had to get there super early. So the only variation in that work for almost 3 years was location.
Wow.
Now, I will say I got really good at it and moved to other companies and started to move up. And then I went from the tech on the ground to kind of the manager of the ground activities.
Okay,
right? So
sure.
I would sometimes go out. I got more into health and safety because these petroleum companies, they like to put on a show.
Of course.
And they hold the contractors to such high health and safety standards. By design, you will violate one of them on a job site.
Okay.
By design, because that transfers liability.
Right.
Oh, you didn't follow company-wise procedure. You missed, for instance, it could be something as simple as, let's say, this is an example I'm making up. This isn't actually a story. Let's say you have an excavation for a bunch of contaminated soil, and you're digging, stockpiling, you're going to get it out, bring clean, fill it. And I don't know, the excavator breaks a hydraulic line. That would be a huge issue, because now you've introduced, and so for any of the big like oil companies, that would stop work. Everyone would immediately stop what they're doing. It doesn't matter if you were working on the excavation, if you're the electrician across the site, stand down. Then the calls go up the chain, right? Like, so that would be a huge issue. Now, in reality, and then that would transfer liability to us.
Right, exactly, right.
The company's off the hook, right? So it's good for them. But in reality, making that a big deal, I understand the legal aspect of it. It's not, though, because you can contain that soil immediately. Right. You're already digging up soil. You turn off the machine and repair the part. So in this example, that would be like weeks of meetings with high ups. Right. Weeks just for that one little thing. I will give you an example that possibly happened. I was working with a contractor, and all of a sudden, well, let me back up. I was with the contractor doing the oversight, the health and safety oversight. That was my job. There was another geologist doing the sampling, because you can't have one person doing both jobs. All right. So I was there for health and safety. So the client shows up. He comes down from Massachusetts. He's not a top guy in this company, but he's, for the environmental division, he had like the Northeast. So he's important. Right? You don't want to do anything. He starts walking around. All of a sudden, he comes over to me, very quiet person. He goes, "Gabriel, come here." And he points under the drill rig. And I'm looking, I'm like, what are you pointing to? There was a little drop of what clearly was not water. And we trace it up, and it's in the bed. The drill rig was kind of angled weird where we were. And so we trace it up, and we see it's the metal side of the truck. You know how these rigs have just like walls, right? And so on the inside of the wall, it was open space where like the mast goes up and all that. Well, there was because of the angle of the rig, there was a little pool of what looked like oil. We follow it back, and we go to a weld. We see like a factory weld, not a weld from a repair, but a weld that the company who made the machine did. Like you wouldn't necessarily think that a manufacturer's weld is going to fail. So that was the result, or that was the source of the leak, but we couldn't see it. But it was there. So then it began a whole big I was on
for
so
one
many
drip.
calls.
And
what they eventually did, and I am not joking, they had the drill rig x-rayed completely. Front to back. Turns out, in that weld, the factory weld, came from the company that there was a little air pocket that apparently would hold up to a certain runtime temperature of the rig. And it was a super hot day that day. The rig was at a bad angle, and we were working through really nasty glacial till. And so the rig was like struggling. So all these factors contributed to just enough pressure to get a leak into a little air pocket that was a factory weld. And the price of the x-raying was...
I'm it was insane.
Anyway, something as simple as that, right, causes such, I don't want to say wasted time, but there's such a show. It's Like,
well, yeah, and it's funny because I hear things like that, and so we at my job that we don't talk about here on the show, we are very environmentally conscious. We're very, because we we are right along a major waterway in our town.
Yep.
And so we look into all of that stuff, make sure storm drains can't get contaminated, everything of that nature. We also do like welding and things like that. So we have to watch out for hot work stuff. And so on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, it's great that we're going to these lengths to determine what the cause is. How do we prevent it in the future? But on the other hand, yeah, you're thinking about it from like a job site perspective. And you're like, we're seriously shutting everything down and going through all of this rigmarole and spending all of this money for a drip. Like at the end of the day, like just put a pan under it, finish the job, and then go and fix it or whatever the case may be. But so I'm always torn with situations like that, because it's like, yeah, on the one hand, it's good to find out what's going on, so the problem can't go any further, it can't get any worse. Right. But on the other hand, it's like, bro, I've got like maybe a couple hours left in the job. Let me just finish the job. So it's got to be frustrating being in those situations, especially like you said, when the motive behind the majority of these situations is these people just trying to take blame off of their own shoulders.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's hard. And there's nothing you can do in that situation.
Well, I'm not doing that anymore. So that's 14 years and then COVID. So we are very lucky, right, Liz? We've lived through 2 and counting recessions.
Dude.
2.
I mean, I don't know if it's luck or if it's just like shared like trauma. I feel like our generation in particular is like, we've just got this shared trauma when we're already like trying to work on ourselves and trying to better ourselves and just trying to survive. And it's like, oh, 9/11 happened our senior year of high school, and Columbine happened our sophomore year of high school, and Sandy Hook happened after we got out of college, and then on top of it, it's like we can't afford eggs. We can't I mean, and
all this bad shit. And then
I was saying the whole time everybody was shitting on Biden for gas prices. I'm like, when I was in college, gas was over $5 a gallon under George W. So how quickly we forget, like you're pissed off at $4.15. It was $5.15 when I was in college under George W. Like, what the fuck? It's crazy.
Right. I remember driving my old pickup beater.
Yeah.
It was either senior year of high school or college. And I would like take a 10. Be like, oh my God, I hope this can last me till Tuesday.
Right, like
right. $10.
Putting $2 in because it's all you've got to your name. Yeah. I swear to God.
Oh, man.
But so what was the reason for you to transition out of that field and look for something else at that point?
So COVID hit, right? No one had any idea. I mean, Friday the 13th, 2020, right? I remember coming home from a happy hour at one of the wing chains in Connecticut.
Sure.
And we all left, and it was like people were kind of like on edge a little bit, and it was like we left earlier than we would, and because there was that inkling going around. Now, interestingly enough, I won't name names because, I didn't get permission, but a friend of mine from college who I've been in touch, like she texts me when she just got married and like, things like that. Like an acquaintance you just kind of keep in touch with, right? Sure. Every now and then.
Sure.
And she texted me out of the blue on the Wednesday before the 13th when shit went down. I love that it was a Friday the 13th, by the way.
I mean,
we cannot
it's just fitting.
Overstate that. She texts me out of the blue, haven't talked to her in a year or more, and she goes, Gabe, my sister works as, I think she's a doctor, in a Massachusetts hospital. Mm-hmm. This is going to be bad. Get ready. And like, again, that was completely unprompted. It was just out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy shit. But, I didn't really comprehend what bad meant.
Of course. Well, none of us did.
Our scales were like, oh, this is bad. And again, to your point, we've lived through 9/11, Columbine, and Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen
I mean, well,
that.
and frankly, we also had that bird flu epidemic that everybody had lost their shit over, and West Nile virus with the mosquitoes, kill if you see a dead bird on the side of the road, report it. Yeah.
We had a pretty good framework for bad.
Right.
But so when I read it, I told my wife, and she's like, oh, maybe we should like get some bottled water or something. It's like,
right. Wrong one. Should have been toilet paper. You should have grabbed the toilet paper.
then the 13th hit, and we got an email Saturday morning. Office will not reopen on Monday. Please work from home.
Yeah.
Details from your supervisor to follow. So Monday, I set up my computer, and at the time, I was doing more office work anyway because I was at that point in my career kind of getting to like middle management area, right? Project management. But I was trying to kind of, and this, I probably shouldn't have done this because it limited my success. I was trying to forge my own path in the environmental industry.
Sure.
And I was an early adopter of using infrared and drones to update maps and like do environmental investigations. And I'm not going to get into
which frankly makes sense when you think about the work itself. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it was just early enough that there wasn't a whole ton of that work.
Right.
So I got jobs here and there doing it, and it was fun, and I think I did a great job with it. But so I was trying to forge my own path on my own in the company, so it wasn't like I was being provided a ton of work from others at the time. And so we get the work from home, and we were working and we're like chatting on the, I don't even know what the chat was at the time, but everyone's kind of nervous because it's like our job, even if you're in the office full time, is predicated on the field work.
Right, of course.
So
right.
If you can't do field work, eventually that pool of data that's waiting for the project managers to review and process, that's going to dry up because there's going to be no new investigations. So we all knew, if given the current scenario, right, offices shut down with no end in sight, and God, you turn on the news, it was chaos.
Yeah.
So we all knew layoffs were coming. And everyone kind of had a pretty good idea of the order it was going to go. And I was in the first group.
The first round, yeah, sure.
I wasn't the only one. There were others, of course, but I was in the first group. So COVID, no paycheck. How the F am I going to get a job? Yeah. Because no one's going to hire environmental at any level at this point. So it was scary. And like, aside from COVID, which as a type 1 diabetic was also terrifying me, am I going to die if I get it? I don't know, because there haven't been case studies on type 1 diabetics that are 40 or almost 40 male, and live in the Northeast. Right. What case study shows how that's going to affect a diabetic? Right, exactly. I was horrified. And then you have this financial obligation, mortgage, kids, so thankfully my wife, of course, because she knows what's best 100% of the time. And I'm not being coy with that. I'm being serious. She looked at some online courses in different areas. Like, she asked me, pick 3 or 4 areas you might want to focus on if we're going to change your career. Okay. And I forgot the list, but I gave it. But cybersecurity was one of those. Sure. So, which is huge now. Huge. Yeah. Oh, well, now, I mean, I hit that wave right at the perfect time.
I mean, we had Stacy on the show before talking about her, the various companies she's worked for in that field. So it seems like if you have a website, you need cybersecurity.
Well, of course.
Yeah. But just in general. Yeah.
So it was one of the 4, and then I'm going to admit this is vain Gabe acting.
That's okay.
Now, and she presented me with several universities. Now, I say that with air quotes because I will get to why in a minute. Presented me with several universities that offered cybersecurity. And one was, let's say, one of them was an Ivy.
Okay.
and they were all roughly the same price. Ivy was, of course, on the top end of what we could afford.
Sure, of course.
But, so I do the program, and I rock it. 4.0, like, I love it.
Nice.
I'm like 2 weeks ahead on my assignments. The instructor, who I still occasionally keep in touch with, great guy. He also taught very passionately. You could tell that this wasn't just a day-to-day, because he taught the course, but he also, had a job.
Sure.
And so he at the time, he was working an international news organization, and it was right around election.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a really stressful job.
I would think so.
But he still showed up to these courses, and he was very passionate. And at least myself as a student, I feed off that.
Sure,
right? Just like
the enthusiasm,
example,
right? Absolutely.
Just like Miss Val's example, right?
Right, absolutely.
There's a dozen teachers and professors that I could mention. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I feed off that, and I become more engaged. And so same thing with coaches in any of the sports I've ever done. I get that energy, and it motivates me. So I rock the course, and the instructor asked me to be his TA for the next session, which was a paid job. So I did that.
Great. And
then obviously I'm applying, and it was tough. Fortunately for the finances, there was a lot of assistance at the time. Like I was on unemployment, and they got extended, and COVID checks and all that.
Right.
Well, we weren't great by any means. We were not in ever danger of like losing the house or anything like that. So I don't want to make it seem like it was that bad. But it was tough in that window between when the TA job ended and when I started getting callbacks, and it was crazy. It was a Saturday morning in like July. We're driving to in-laws' house to go. They're on a river, and kids play in the water and all that. So driving to their house, and my phone rings. It's a New Jersey number, and I'm like, what is this? And they leave a message, and it's this guy who I look up, and he is the head of the company. It's a recruiting agency.
Wow.
And the head of the company called me on a Saturday morning. So Patrice is like, you've got to call him back right now. Like, if he calls you on a Saturday morning, you returning that call.
Yeah, sure.
And so I called him back, and he was a great guy, or is a great guy, I should say. I just haven't interacted with him since then. He was like, hey, Gabriel, like, I'm glad you returned my call. I think I've got a great opportunity for you. He goes through all this stuff, and he's like, your resume looks good. We just need you to talk. And he's a staffing company. So he was providing me as a service to the company that eventually hired me.
Yeah.
But he was like, I'm glad you called. I think this is a great fit. I'm going to set up the calls with the people on the other end, the company's end. They'll be in touch. Great. And then like Monday and Tuesday, I get calls from who would then have been eventually, each person was my manager at one point. They've since been promoted way up. So technically they still are, but they called me on back-to-back days and went through basically what I just described to you, and got a temp contract work. It was initially for 6 months, which would have taken me through Christmas to February. And, they did allude to the fact, we're bringing you on because this is the busy season. We cannot guarantee a job will be there afterwards, but if performance is good and the opportunity arises, it was me and two others that were the temp work, right? The opportunity were to arise for a permanent position, you would be one of the first considered, based on performance.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't need to really interview. They would just switch us to full time.
Sure.
And they extended the contract by 3 months. And then at the end of 3 months, I was getting a little nervous. And then the second manager from that call called me and was like, I have a spot on my team. Do you want to come on full time? That's what I did.
That's awesome.
And I've been there. This August will be 4 years.
That's great.
So I've been there just 3.5 years.
Yeah. Well, so now, without getting maybe into specifics necessarily, because, obviously in the nature of what you do, and Stacy really couldn't provide much with us either, but is shit as bad as we're told that it is? Like, are things as scary on the interwebs and from other countries, from other, from other, what do they call them? Bad actors. Essentially, are you busy all the time? Like, are you?
Well, to answer the second question first, yes, I'm busy all the time.
Yeah.
Now, again, I've only been doing this for just over 3 years, so please take that into account.
And listen, it's certainly still more knowledge and expertise than any of us have.
My point is, I wouldn't consider myself like an industry expert at this point, but I've been doing it for over 3 years, so I've actually been on both the threat response team, which is something bad comes in, a user clicks on a malicious email, and now there's malware. Like that's threat. You don't know when you're going to be called, but you're the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was where I started, and then I switched. I'm still there at security engineering, which is less reactionary and more, let's build these castle walls high. Right? We are the infrastructure that is protecting the company.
Right.
So we don't necessarily respond to all bad emails or things like that, but we try and make it so those don't come through.
Sure.
Is it as bad? I mean, again, we get back to that definition of what is bad, because I will say, and if you don't mind, I want to look the name of this documentary up, because I will recommend it if you don't mind.
Sure, I love a documentary.
It's a cybersecurity. It's a
absolutely.
cybersecurity documentary.
Well, so while
it's
yeah.
What's up?
No, go ahead.
Here.
Well, I was just going to say, while you're doing that, so like, for me, for example, I talk to I'm very concerned about like my mom, because, while she has an iPhone, she's familiar with the internet, I still feel like there are things that happen that, not necessarily out of naivete, but I just feel like they've gotten so much more creative, and they're coming at all angles and all different ways of trying to scam people, that like I'm constantly saying to my mom, and thankfully like she's figured it out over time as well. Like I'm always saying to people, I'm like, if you get some kind of text or if you get some kind of call, like don't call them back. Like if especially if they're referring to like a specific account of yours or something, go straight to that app or that website that you through that account, whatever, and look up your stuff. Like don't, those kinds of things. But I think they've gotten past even that stuff, and they're getting even more creative, and they're coming from, like what kind of advice do you have for that, for just the average Joe to protect themselves?
Yeah. So that is a very complicated question.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to find it.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's a very complicated question. So, there it is. It was an HBO documentary, but it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
Prime.
Yep.
It is called The Perfect Weapon.
Okay. Ooh.
And let me just make sure. That's not available to stream anymore. But
okay. Well, if anyone wants to,
excellent documentary.
Okay.
The Perfect Weapon.
Okay.
It was produced by HBO, so it's probably on their streaming service. But it's also available for rent and buy on Amazon. It's great, and it will give you it will give you a lot of information, but in a way that's not just high level, but easily digestible if you weren't in the industry. Okay. So someone who's not a cybersecurity expert is still going to get something out of this. Yeah. Right. So it's good for dum-dums like me to understand. Highly recommend it. So is it as bad? The average person. So, and I hate to be repetitive because I'm sure this is on every podcast, every online post, with the increase in AI. Yeah. Is it as bad as what I think you're alluding to right now? I'm going to say not yet. Okay. So the nation state actors, and I'm going to say this and sound a little callous, but they don't care about you, right? They care about trends and data, and they care about infrastructure, energy grids, things like that. So those are varsity squad.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I guess let me break it down. So I had met someone a couple years back who was like totally anti social media, and which is fine because it is trash. It's horrible. It's a shame that I'm on it, but but they had made the comment to me like something along the lines of like, well, because China's getting all of your information and and I looked at him and I said, listen, at the end of the day, I am no one of significance. I am not connected to anyone or any entity of significance. So if somebody in China is really wasting their fucking time going through my Facebook or my pittance of a bank account, God bless them, but they're not going to be with that company long, because it's just, I think people are so terrified, but at the end of the, and yes, now mind you, I have had friends who have had their identity stolen, and it's a real pain in the ass, and it does damage, of course. But at the end of the day,
and all that,
the average Joe is of little consequence to these people, is of little, they're not interested in your latest shopping spree at Target or what you were looking up on the interwebs. I just don't feel like we should be living in this frightened state all the time, that we can't just live our lives on the internet.
Exactly. I will say they're not interested in you personally. They're interested in you as a data point for trending.
Right.
They don't care that you bought a brush. They care that where you're geolocated, 100 people in that area also bought that same brush.
Sure.
That's the data that they want.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and so Stacey, for example, Stacey on our previous episode said, and she and her wife Katie have said this ad nauseum. They talk about it all the time. Stop filling out those surveys on the internet. And don't. No. Oh, I'm sorry. Personally, I love them. I used to fill them out all the time. I haven't seen many as of late, but like she was coming from the point of they're getting your password through that information, and I'm like, I promise you, my password. There is absolutely nothing in that survey that would lead to that. But granted, I can understand other people, yes, that they might have the name of their dog or the street they grew up on, whatever. Right. So sure, I get it. But again, I every time they'll say something like that, I'm like, I really don't think somebody in China or Russia or North Korea are looking at my Facebook survey. I really don't.
And there are certainly very talented bad actors that could randomly choose you and do like I want your credit, and could that happen? Am I going around worried about it? No. Maybe I'm naive, but I just don't see that. Like, you would have to make yourself a target, right? For instance, there is I don't know, how much can I say? A certain group of people that have a real gross ideology that started in the early 30s. Let's just leave it at that.
Sure thing.
And I may have removed their online records for a time.
Sounds good to me.
and their method of communication, but they got it back up.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, it's.
Well,
I just admitted to committing a crime, but
hey, but not to go, get straight into political chat. And we are running a little long now, but I have a feeling we're going over an hour, and that's okay. But so. I literally just shared a news clip from Germany the other day, where it is illegal in Germany not only to share something that is false or provides false information, or paint somebody in an incorrect. And basically, if you're spreading lies, you could potentially be arrested, if not fined. Also, if you are resharing those lies, so even if you weren't the source of that information, the fact that you're sharing it is also a crime. In Australia, for example, Australians cannot have their cell phones in their hand in a running vehicle. So even if you're pulled over to the side, if the vehicle is running and you're holding your cell phone, you will get fined. You will get a ticket. You also get a fine if you don't vote in Australia. It is part of the law. You have to, as a citizen, vote, or you will get a fine.
I like that.
So I hear these things, and I don't understand. And I've had this conversation with a mutual friend of ours, and I've said to him, I said, why can't we do any of these things in this? I mean, mind you, the current climate, of course not. But say 20, 30 years ago, when the internet started picking up, for example, when we started getting these, these false articles, this fake news, whatever.
Right.
Why couldn't we back then just put the kibosh on it right then and there and say no? And my friend's argument was, well, we're such a big country. That's the problem. The problem is we're too big for these kinds of problems. Whereas those countries, they're smaller, the population's smaller, the government is more conservative, they don't have as many options, they don't have as many parties, what have you. And of course, at the bottom line, everybody will always say, no matter who you talk to, it's, oh, well, freedom, because we can't, because freedom. Whereas where I'm coming from, I'm sorry, putting out negative shit, putting out absolute lies, that's not freedom. That's not, like that. I'm certainly not taking away a freedom of yours by not allowing you to bullshit people. And I don't understand why that's an argument. I don't understand why we're using that as an excuse, because if you're lying to someone, that's not you using the First Amendment. That's you just being a piece of shit.
Correct.
So I have nothing wrong with making people pay for being pieces of shit, but apparently I'm on the wrong side of. Apparently that's crazy talk.
And I know you said we're running on time, but I'm going to make this point.
Please do.
I have thought about that. I have thought about this.
Yeah.
And it's tough for me to admit when I can't figure out the answer. And in this case, I agree.
To me, it's common sense.
Right. I agree with 99% of what you said. The problem I run into, right, you say, and you plural, right, say that, right, you make fake news illegal, okay? So only legitimate, verifiable information can be passed on.
Sure.
That is perfect on paper.
Right.
Who is the arbiter of the single source of truth?
Right.
Is it the government? Who put them in power? Are they educated enough on the subjects that they're determining? Right? Because then you get into this gray area, and it's almost like the whole thing, and not to digress, but communism on paper is ideal. Yes. Because it just works on paper, but then you throw human emotion and
greed and
so then you get these pieces that on paper would work, but doesn't in practical application. Yeah. So I agree. Information should be verified. 15 years as a scientist, classically trained, you got to cite your sources, and those sources have to cite their sources. Yeah. And eventually you need empirical research.
Now, mind you, I have kind of, not to say I do this regularly, but I've done a deep dive here and there, because I hear all the time, even if a story is perceived to be false or incorrect, there is some truth to it. Like the foundation of that story, it came from some shred of truth, that's fine. Yeah. But again, I'm thinking to myself, well, then why don't you just fucking start with the truth then? Don't put a spin on it. But again, we've got to sensationalize everything. We've got clickbait. People are only reading articles. Right. People are only reading reading articles by the headline now, so all of the headlines have to be salacious and bullshit. I just
and don't make it more than 2 words.
Right, and there's and we're retrained. We've now retrained our brains because of Reels and TikTok and stories that we can't handle anything more than 60 to 90 seconds at a time. I find myself I'm guilty of that. But so what the fuck can we, like, I feel like we're just fucked. I feel like there's no end in sight. I feel like we're not getting, like, even if this administration does all the damage that they're going to do to the point where we're never going to have Republicans in charge for the next 30 years like we had previously, I feel like the damage has been done. People have made mountains of money off this bullshit to the point where they're never going to not allow these kinds of things to keep happening because they've realized it works in their interest, and that's all that matters. I wish I knew what the answer was other than moving to another country, because I'm telling you what, now that Robert Irwin's photo shoot is out, Australia's looking better and better to me every goddamn day. And I am ready to tell my friends and family, hey, I'll check in with you on Facebook, but I got to get out of here because I can't.
I nothing you said was incorrect. And because of the time, and if you would like to have me back, because that I could speak to for about 8 to 9 hours. And, take a quick water break and then speak another time.
I mean, so I do remember when Trump first won, I do remember you had to take a social media break because you could not believe the things you were seeing from your own friends and family and I completely understand it. I completely understand it.
So real quick,
sure.
We can wrap up. Again, I'd love to come back.
Yeah, I'd love to have you.
Talk more about whatever you want. So I'll tell you what happened, and I'm in therapy. I recommend therapy for everyone.
Yeah.
I
think it should be mandatory, honestly.
Taboo.
Yeah.
I've been in it for a while, and I'm continuing, and it's been helpful in a lot of aspects of my life. And the best way I've kind of described in the most succinct way possible how or why I reacted so severely. I'm very right-brained analytical or whatever, right, left brain, whatever the
I think it's right.
Side is. I don't know. So, things are procedural, things occur in order, task A, then B, right? Like there's a structure to, well, at least I hope and try to, and there's a structure to life, right? And what happened then, and again, more recently, in my head is a 1 + 1 = 0. That's what my brain does. You see it, and it's not true. It could never happen. But there it is. 1 + 1 = 0. It's right there. And I know that's kind of a philosophical way, but in my head, that broke my brain completely.
Sure.
Because there was a thing that was existing that could not possibly exist because I was convinced that could never happen. And I don't mean convinced like I was worried. I was in lock, 100% sure, not a single doubt in my mind that our country was full of Nazis.
Well,
and I'll end on that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's being proven more and more every day. They're just coming out of the woodwork now. But you're right. We won't go down that rabbit hole just now. But I would love to have you back for sure.
This was wonderful. It was great to see you again.
Great to see you. So we'll end there for now. Okay. On the such a positive note that we're overrun by
to
Nazis.
Leave little cliffhangers.
Yeah,
right? You got to keep them wanting more, right? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so we'll end with that. So again, thank you, Gabe. This was my friend Gabe for joining. And again, we'll definitely have you back, gang. This was Try Not to Curse, and I think we succeeded. We did pretty good, and we will catch you next time.
Sounds good. Cheers.